Welcome to KOCT's Roundtable. My name is Alison St. John. I'm host for this important program to help you decide who should represent the 49th Congressional District. The primary election this June 7th will decide which of the 7 candidates running for this post will face off in November. As you know, this year is a midterm election, so the president is not on the ballot. But the balance of power in Congress could change depending on your vote. Oceanside is in the 49th Congressional District, which is one of the hot races in the country. In other words, a lot of money is being spent by both Democrats and Republicans to gain control of this seat. It stretches from Orange County through Camp Pendleton to Solana Beach. To give you a little background, this district was part of the so-called Blue Wave in 2018, when Democrat Mike Levin defeated a Republican and turned what had been a Republican district for years into a Democratic one. But after recent redistricting, the voter registrations are now fairly evenly balanced, so this is a highly competitive race. You could receive a ballot in the mail anytime after May 9th, and you can mail that in if you want, anytime after that until primary election day, June 7th. Who's running? 5 Republicans and 1 Democrat are challenging Mike Levin in his bid for a 3rd term. In alphabetical order, their names are Lisa Bartlett, Brian Maryott, Josiah O'Neill, Chris Rodriguez, Nadia Smalley, and Renee Taylor. I'm Alison St. John, and thanks again for watching KOCT, the voice of North County. We have with us now Brian Maryott, who is a Republican and who ran for this same position back in 2018 and 2020, so this is his 3rd time around. And Brian is a certified financial planner and a businessman. So I'd like to welcome you very much to
Thank you,
KOCT.
Alison. It's nice to be with you and your viewers.
Yes, good. Well, it's good to see you again. And as I was saying, this is your 3rd time around. What makes you feel like this time you might actually make it?
Well, you either come to a race for Congress with major name recognition, it's an incredible undertaking, or you come to it determined to build that, almost like you build a business. In 2018, Darrell Leiser retired. To my eye, unexpectedly. I had just stepped out of the corporate world to continue being a good mayor and council member in my city of San Juan Capistrano with the notion of someday running for higher office. We dipped our toe in that primary. We had a big Republican name at the time, Diane Harkey, who kind of won the day in the primary, which everybody expected. But it was great for getting connected throughout the community, throughout the 49th. As you know, it goes all the way down to Del Mar and all the way up now through Laguna Niguel to northern Laguna Niguel. So it's a massive district. So you begin getting connected with folks, making an impression on people. And our participation in that primary was critical to what we were able to do last cycle, which was clear the field and be in our first general election effort. And in a very difficult cycle for Republicans, get 47% of the vote. Now we've invited, that performance caused 2 things to happen. One, it caused the NRCC and Republican Party leadership to designate it a target seat for this upcoming cycle.
Right.
It also invited some company. So we have some company in what I would call the Republican primary, the Republicans who are in the jungle primary along with us. And I think it's also just an industry, if you will, for lack of a better way to put it, that rewards determination and persistence. And of course, history is full of examples of that.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and why it is that you stand a better chance, you think, than the other 4 Republicans running for this seat. What is your background?
Bulk of my background's been in financial services, advisor, certified financial planner, regional management executive. I have what I think is the perfect mix to go to Congress and make a difference, which is a lot of business experience, results-oriented, accountable performance, and then some government experience. Nothing in Congress is going to overwhelm me. We'll know exactly how to operate and get things done. I have experience in the industry in a very intense state house and then also as an elected official in my home city. So I have a great deal of experience and background. We have tremendous support from Republican elected officials in the 49th Congressional District. Virtually every Republican elected official has stuck with us, has endorsed us, along with the Orange County Republican Party, San Diego Republican Party, state of California Republican Party. So everybody believes in our organization, which is remarkable at this point. We have campaign offices in both counties. We have over 400 regular volunteers. We have large coalitions of different folks from different walks of life and interests that are with us, including a very large veterans coalition. And it's remarkable to see the support throughout the district.
Talk about the issues, perhaps the top 3 issues that you would say you would be focused on if you were to win this seat.
Yeah, I think when you think about quality of life and you think about where, to my eye, the progressive movement is working to bring the country and the state, I'm troubled. I think in terms of our economy and the cost of living for people, the recent trends are very distressing. We have borrowed now massive sums of money that are historic relative to our country's income, even for wartime, and we're at relative peace. I mean, it's quite something. So we are loading now over $30 trillion of debt on the backs of our kids and future generations, and this debt is hardly manageable at today's very, very low interest rates.
If I may interject quickly that historically, I believe when the Republicans have been in power, the national debt has increased faster than when Democrats are in power. But would that change if you were in Congress?
It would certainly change, and statistics can roll different ways and ebb and flow, but at the end of the day, neither party is working on debt or deficit reduction. It has become impossible in the Democrat Party to even talk about it. You'll get primaried. In the Republican Party, it's becoming increasingly unfashionable. And for me, that's easy for me. I've had my money-making career. We support term limits. I'm not going there to have a 30-year career. I'm going there to make a difference and come back to the farm. And I can speak to it, and I will. It is very distressing what we are doing in this country with debt. Consider this. When you put municipal, county, state, and federal government together, and you layer it all up, on an inflation-adjusted basis in both Orange and San Diego County, we are now spending almost twice per person what we were spending 20 years ago with worse results. That is staggering. Government is truly broken at every level. So there's a lot of work to do. A healthy economy that can grow in a healthy way is important to me. That's one of the 3.
And how would you actually change the economic balance?
You have to lead the way on debt and deficit reduction. You have to be willing to talk about freezing and cutting everything but Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the military. That's a chunk of the budget for sure, but you have to be willing to talk about everything else that is exploding in its growth and size and in such a distressing way.
And I'm assuming that you would not increase taxes, but of course that's an assumption. Perhaps there is some section of the population that you might be willing to increase taxes on.
Yeah, so 2017 tax reform, I favored mostly all of it. It was a long time that we got taxes reasonable on our largest employers and also our smallest employers. It was my last year in the corporate world, and I watched the company that I worked for when that tax relief happened immediately go to a $15 an hour minimum wage nationally, extend paternity and maternity benefits, and just right on down the line with pension benefits. Most Fortune 500 companies did that. For middle-class Americans, $1,500 to $2,300 a year, that's a lot of money to somebody trying to save and grow something to get their kids off to college without becoming overwhelmed by debt. So I think our taxes are in a pretty fair place today as it stands today, and we have to resist the temptation to go back to where we were overtaxing as an answer. And I don't believe that we have to. Government is terribly inefficient now. When you look at this new infrastructure plan, there's a way to do it to save hundreds of billions of dollars in terms of how projects got done, but they chose to do it in a way that loaded up and ran through the Department of Transportation and would add tens of billions of dollars in cost, if not hundreds of billions. There's an example of virtually every category of spending like that in federal and state government. So there's a lot of work to do on the economy. We've got to get our border manageable, safe, and under control.
This is your second issue?
Yeah, for the sake of both people on both sides of the border. It is the human tragedy that's going on our border, Allison, is so painful to watch, and it's so disingenuous. And both parties have been a little disingenuous on this issue for decades now, but I would suggest for the last few years, Democrats have been particularly disingenuous and dishonest about the issue. We are not being fair to legal residents of this country. We are not being fair to immigrants who've come here and done things the right way. We are hurting wages in different sectors for them. We're increasing crime. Poisonous drugs are flowing over our border at rates that we've never seen in our country relative to the population. It's time to get a handle on that and maintain the sovereignty of our nation.
And would you do that by building the wall, completing the wall?
Well, we've got barriers in some areas that work very well. We've got barriers that were underway and got frozen. We've got technology that's untapped. We've got human resources in the court system that has to get staffed up properly. You take a look at every possible resource and way of doing things to get the border safe, secure, and manageable for everyone's benefit. I mean, mothers are putting their daughters in some of these broken countries on birth control, expecting they're going to get raped trying to get here. Just the other day, 3 or 4 drowned in the river. How long are we going to sit and watch that and hear those stories and be comfortable with that? This is not Germany. No knock on Germany, but not everybody wants to be in Germany. A lot of people want to be in the United States.
So you would beef up the Border Patrol, I assume?
Without question. We have to. We have to, for their own safety as well. We cannot be an open border country. Progressives would like to think we can. That's clearly where the Biden administration is trying to take this, and they're not that subtle about it. But the level of human tragedy and the dishonesty and the gross unfairness to legal residents of the country is now beyond the pale. And
your third top issue?
So for me as a parent and an aging California, healthcare is very dear to my heart. Where my congressman wants to take healthcare and the progressive movement want to take it is unacceptable to me, which is government runs healthcare. It's not Medicare for all, to be clear. In Congressman Levin's bill, Medicare goes away, private insurance goes away, which is a big part of Medicare. It's the VA from 40 years ago for everybody. You and I stand in the same line and the same weight and the same lack of second opinions and choices in our healthcare as someone who just came yesterday and broke the law to get here. I mean, that's how absurd it is. And once we go down a path like that, we can never rewind. Understand or consider that Vermont, a tiny little state, couldn't even do single payer where private insurance didn't go away. And they want the federal government to run healthcare. It's absurd, and we'll lose all of our innovation with it. So I don't know how much it'll impact me and you in our lifetimes, but I'll tell you, children and future generations will be in a system that has been completely broken and destroyed with an effort to get everybody have health care available to them, which ironically they are, and we do have that now in this country. And yet Levin and that progressive movement want to take us down a path that's truly, truly destructive. It's a very important issue for me because on a scale of 1 to 10, if we're at about a 7 now, in terms of our ability to be world class, we could be at a 9. And if we go that route, we'll be at a 2, and we'll never recover from that. And countless lives will be lost, an extraordinary human toll. It's going on in Canada today. I mean, it's documented. And so if you can tell, I'm passionate about that issue because it's destructive.
To get clear, presumably, if you could be more specific about how you would like to see healthcare reformed and access to healthcare.
We have to bring competition back in the marketplace. We have to bring insurance carriers back in the marketplace. We have to have price transparency. We have to put the bulk of the system back in the hands of the private enterprise system. And we have to use everything that's been built, that's in place, to make sure nobody falls through the cracks. And there'll be some elements of the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare that should stay in place. At this point, they really structurally have to stay in place on a practical level. But we can do so much better getting competition back in the marketplace, getting government out of the way, customized policies. In the United States, there's enough population for every profile, every walk of life to be insurable on a healthcare basis. There just is. It's a simple numbers issue. So the 23 to 26-year-olds no longer living with their parents, presumably healthy, that's an insurable pool. It's an insurable pool in California alone, never mind nationally. So much we can do in healthcare and begin to bring costs down, because unfortunately Obamacare doubled to tripled the cost of healthcare insurance in this country. We're covering more people, but with fewer dollars. I've worked with families who are on the Bronze Care Plan, which is the exchange plan, and it's the lowest level plan in Obamacare. It's a $5,000 deductible. If a family's making $60,000 a year with 3 kids, and they're faced with a $5,000 deductible. I can tell you from working with families like that currently and over the years, that might as well be $5 million to them. So it's really remarkable in the name of getting more people insured where Obamacare has taken us, and unwinding from that and improving on it is going to be difficult but doable. That's the good news.
Well, while we're talking about healthcare, have we learned anything from how we've dealt with COVID? Is there anything that you feel we should have done different?
Not so much healthcare. I think what we will learn ultimately, I hope we will learn ultimately from COVID is, A, how did this happen? 2 years of government reaction to it. How did we do as a nation reacting to it? I have a lot of concerns about how we reacted to it as a nation. And
can you be specific about what you did not like?
Well, my own personal opinion is, as a nation, relative to the lethality of the virus, granted it was a very snarly virus, the likes of which our body hadn't seen. It took us some time to get our heads around it and our medical community around it. The only place we distinguished ourselves, really, I would say, is with the vaccines. When you talk about government reaction, the relay and communication of information, the coordination of resources, I would say we were at about a D plus, D to D plus. We spent close to $7 trillion in this country. We can only account for $2.5 trillion, and some of it just didn't make any sense. Structurally, it didn't make any sense. That's why you have all the graft and all the corruption and all the loss and all the fraud, because whenever something isn't logical, it leaves opportunities for all of that.
So did I hear that you were implying that it was taken almost too seriously and that there were too many mandates?
No, it isn't a mandates issue. I've said before, government's broken. So when this thing came upon us, instead of getting our arms around and being protective of the people who are most vulnerable and speaking forthrightly about all of that, we went to a very emotional place with it as a country in terms of the reaction to it. Even once we'd flattened the curve in the hospitals and so forth, we still had schools shut down, even though school children just simply weren't at risk from it. So, I mean, my family had it. I was the only one with symptoms. My, 3 kids and my wife, 0 symptoms.
So you feel like there was an overreaction?
I don't know if I'd use the word overreaction. There was just an emotional reaction that led to poor execution of government services. So there were areas where government could do good things, right, especially in the early days, and didn't even have the wherewithal to do it, didn't even have the functioning capability to do it because they were so caught up in the optics and the emotion of the issue. And so my biggest fear is that we don't learn from it and we don't question the effectiveness of the shutdowns, because if something comes at us with a 3 or 4 or 5% death rate, we're going to have martial law.
So, for example, what China is doing right now is the opposite of what you would be doing.
It's completely absurd, and
Okay.
I mean and much of what we did was absurd.
Okay.
Our 7-year-old just spent the last 2 years with a mask on her face. She sleeps in our bed at night. I don't know if the two are related, anxiety. I just know typically 5-year-olds don't spend their school day hearing about death rates, transmissibility, their ability to pass a disease on to someone. We didn't handle it well as a nation in terms of communication, coordination of resources, and the design of the programs. As a mayor of my city, the governor hooked up a program with FEMA to get meals delivered to elderly people. And I thought, well, this is useful. We don't want them going out. We can get meals delivered to them. No restaurant in my city could even figure out how to get involved in the plan. Come to find out, despite the line item and millions of dollars, there never was a functioning capacity for it. And the list is so long of all of the things like that, but there were plenty of headlines and plenty of politicians increasing their name recognition and gearing up for their next run for office. Remarkable.
Well, while we're on the subject of emotional health issues, Roe versus Wade may get overturned by the Supreme Court. Where do you stand on abortion?
Well, I don't generally comment on anything that's stolen or fabricated or leaked. I just don't. I think ultimately we may be heading for a day in our country where every state house is going to have a robust debate about this, and we'll probably have states with different laws if you project out a few years, if this is how the case goes.
So does that sound to you like a good outcome if it goes to the states?
Well, I think Roe v. Wade, by many people's accounts, including, I would suggest, liberal justices who have been interviewed about it and spoken about it, is kind of flawed in its reasoning. So it may well have been inevitable, but it doesn't surprise me that this court may overturn it.
Let's just shift to another issue. Going back to your first issue of the economy, everybody is very upset about inflation. And do you think Congress has a role in inflation? Is there something that Congress can do to help people who are suffering?
Yes. And the problem, government generally should be guardrails and boundaries. And we have built inarguably the greatest success story economically in human history, bar none. You can adjust it for every metric that you can think of. It is inarguably the greatest success story in human history. And it's largely because it's private enterprise and it reflects the spirit of our country, the ingenuity of our country, and the opportunity of our country. So government has a job with guardrails and kind of keeping a relatively level playing field, if you will. When government over-injects itself, this is typically where you have problems. In the 70s, Nixon did price controls and inflation. It took us a decade and a half to unwind inflation. And in this case, and I watched it, it's like watching a train wreck in slow motion. And I've tweeted about it, and when you take this many trillions of dollars and you shove it into a system that can't account for it properly, this is going to be one of the outcomes. And that's what they've done. In the name of COVID relief, they have printed and borrowed from my kids and your kids and future generations in order to do all these things that the system couldn't handle. And that's part of the issue. So we really have a perfect storm now because we have this going on despite historically, cyclically, very low interest rates. So when you project out and interest rates are considerably higher, it's going to be truly, truly distressing. So the systemic stuff that government can impact, the Fed and public policy, you just have to do a smarter job. And I'll just give you an example of what was one of the things that was so absurd. I've worked with hundreds and thousands of households and still do. And so you coach them through different things that they deal with in life. When you go through an issue in life that impacts your household's finances, when you get through the storm, you don't sit down at the kitchen table and say, okay, honey, we got through that and the loss of your job or whatever it is. Now let's go out and borrow a bunch of money and buy a lot of cool stuff. And that's exactly what the Democrats have done. And they've argued for another $3.5 trillion of cool stuff, at least half of which is purely socialist spending. So it's just, There's no common sense to that. So this is inflation, a pinch of which we might have experienced regardless because of demand that had been pent up. But most of this is government overreach.
So I guess the implication is then that government should not be handing out as much money to help people as they did during COVID.
Well, who they helped is there'll be books written on that. And I can tell you anecdotally, it's remarkable to hear the stories. But the bulk of the trillions of dollars in spending in the last year is problematic and crushing our energy independence before we even got to enjoy it for a year, okay? This is remarkable. This will go down in history as the dumbest management of national public policy, potentially in modern history. I remember with my dad when Jimmy Carter said we were going to be energy independent someday. And my dad rolled his eyes. He said, son, that's never going to happen, okay? And we were 2 years ago.
So do you feel like California, for example, should be exploiting more of the oil and gas resources that we have rather than restricting it?
California is really not the issue. I mean, we're going to need I don't think we need offshore drilling in California because we're going to need offshore to get any kind of water supply because we've ignored it for 4 decades.
So, but nationally, you would feel like it was a good idea to
Well,
open
it was
up
certainly a bad idea to come in as an administration and on day one do everything you possibly could to signal to the industry that you were going to crush it. And just like they're crushing people who drive diesels, they're crushing people who put gas in their cars, and they're crushing them every day, and they just don't care.
So I need to just ask you, we have just a few minutes left, to ask you about San Onofre, which is in this district, and Governor Newsom has recently backed off on the idea of closing Diablo Canyon, the other nuclear power station in the state. Where do you stand on nuclear energy?
Well, first to San Onofre, well, nuclear energy is obviously very clean energy, and the technology to reduce the waste that's coming is quite remarkable. Whether the industry will be functioning by the time some of that technology comes is anybody's guess. But San Onofre is now just a waste issue. It'll never be a functioning power plant again. So the issue is we've got 35 states that in perhaps the greatest failure in modern history or recent history, the greatest domestic policy failure, I have called it. And nothing has changed. We spent $15 billion studying Yucca Mountain. The rock's not perfect and a little bit of engineering challenges, but at the end of the day, that was our best option. Harry Reid and Obama killed it. Now we've got waste in 35 different states, including ours, buried deeper than ever. There is no answer for it. Interim storage will only come about if they accept some repurposing. We have got to have a deep mountain repository. We can't shoot it into space. If Finland can do it and they're opening next year, we can do it.
So quickly, I would just like to say, so if you got the position, you would give up on the idea of interim storage that they're working on now?
Unfortunately,
and go back
we need interim storage. We're going to have no choice but to have interim storage for a period of time. But the Democrats are going to have to accept commercial operators, and they're going to have to accept a for-profit element to it. And I don't know if they will. My congressman so far hasn't, and had no use for Yucca Mountain, and didn't think it was fair to put the waste in one state, and all the usual nonsense that has got us with 35 different states sitting on this stuff, and all of us having paid hundreds of billions in penalties and taxes because of it.
So in the last minute we have left, we're asking everybody on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you position yourself between, say, Mitt Romney and Donald Trump?
With all due respect, it's just a silly question. You know, Donald Trump served as president for 4 years. Some years from now, we'll look back and have a gauge of the success, just like we can look back now on George Jr. and have a gauge in Obama. You have to have some years before you can really gauge the performance of a presidency. It's such a big picture position, and we never got that test from Mitt Romney. So it's not a number I'm going to speculate on.
Are you hoping that perhaps Donald Trump will get a chance to have a bit more time to prove himself?
Oh, I don't think Donald Trump will run for president again. We've got some amazing young leaders coming along in the Republican Party. I think it's going to be their time to shine, and I think 24 we're going to win the White House.
Great. Well, we've come to the end of our time. I'd like to thank you very much for being here on KOCT.
My pleasure, Allison. Yeah.
We've been speaking with Brian Maryott, who is one of the Republican candidates running for the 49th Congressional District. Thank you so much for watching.
KOCT, the voice of North County.